rule the cricket world. Now the rule seems coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 56 of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt, and you know who's with me.
Yeah, Santoki here, and Mash. It's a new one for us. This is the first time we've had a guest from St. Vincent on the show, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Their football team calls themselves Vincy Heat, so it's only right we're bringing the heat today. We've got some hot topics we want to talk with this guest. So, Mash, without further ado, do you want to introduce our guest to the people?
Yeah, of course, and I'm glad you've immediately got in there and referenced to St. Vincent and Grenadines. Do you know what I had to do before we recorded this? I was like, who are the top 10 cricketers from St. Vincent and Grenadines? I had to go and look to see who has represented West Indies from that region. And the person we've got, although we've got him in because he's a former selector of the West Indies, he has actually represented West Indies as well. So we have got former West Indian international. That's how I'm actually introducing him. Former West Indian international, Miles Bascombe. Miles, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me.
An absolute pleasure, Miles. And I'm hoping you're smiling that we introduce you as a former West Indian international first and foremost. I don't know how many people will remember that you actually played for West Indies in your career as well. But we're gonna get right into it, Miles. We're gonna get right into it because this was when we announced that we were getting yourself on. Of course, lots and lots of questions flooded in because your most recent position within West Indies cricket obviously has been a selector, one of the selectors within West Indies cricket. So we're going to try and not just unpick selection, but just unpick your journey in cricket and let's call it the art of selection. That might even be the title of the podcast. But Santoki, let me head over straight to you to chop this up and get into it.
Yeah, so before we get into selections, I guess it'll be good to talk about cricket in St. Vincent because it's not something that really gets much of a spotlight. But it'd be interesting to know because I guess out of all the Windward Island nations, St. Vincent's had the most players, I think 14, who have made it to West Indies at international level. Obviously, you've got Sunil Ambrose, Keswick Williams, Obed McCoy being the most recent. So, as someone growing up in St. Vincent, what is the cricket culture? Is it the dominant and most popular sport there? What's kind of like the development system as a youngster in St. Vincent in regards to cricket?
Okay. It's pretty much like most other islands. It used to be the most dominant sport. I think that is probably Caribbean wide. Now football probably would have taken the lead. Primary school cricket, that's where I got my start, and many of the persons that would have been in that list of 14 players who would have gone on to play for West Indies. It's not so prevalent now. In fact, we haven't had primary school cricket probably for almost 20 years. I think that is one of the downfalls. One of the things that has led to the fall off of the game, as in its popularity. However, there is still a strong cricket contingent. The St. Vincent and Grenadines Cricket Association is enjoying probably the six or so years of being the number one association in the island. So, we're definitely working on getting cricket back to its former prominence. I don't know if you're familiar with the VPL, which is a T10 league that we put off in conjunction with Dream 11, which has been a huge success. It has seen most recently quite a lot of participation from spectators, a lot of kids turning out, and it's really good to see local players kids coming up to local players asking for autographs and pictures and so on. So that is really, that has been what has brought back a spark, in cricket, at least in the younger kids. And COVID has had its effect, as it has all over the world, really. So we are trying, despite COVID, to keep that cricket flag flying.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the Vinci Premier League, because weren't you playing in it as well? I mean, not Vinci,
I
the
did.
Vinci 10, yeah.
Yes, I was actually.
I swear the Vinci Premier League was like the first cricket that happened after COVID, because it happened in like a month or two after. And I remember like people around the world were just watching it because they hadn't seen cricket in a few months. And the Vinci Premier League was like the first thing that had restarted.
Correct. It was. It was a huge undertaking. And, I have to give kudos to the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Health Services Authority that had the confidence in the Cricket Association to come up with the protocols, which they vetted, of course, and agreed to, and then executed quite well. So that was definitely a huge positive for the St. Vincent and Grenadines Cricket Association.
Cool. So let's go back to your own career. Obviously, you mentioned primary school cricket. At what age did you think, okay, I could make cricket a career of mine or get to a professional level? Obviously, you sort of made your name at the Stanford T20 in 2006. But was that a turning point for you, or was it earlier in your life you thought, okay, cricket could be a professional career for me?
Well, cricket has always been what I loved. I grew up in a family of many uncles and cousins that loved the game and play the game even to today. So it came naturally, wanting to play. It was what everybody did. So it for a very long time it was just what I did to have fun, and then along came under 15 teams and national under 15 school team, under 19 teams, and then pretty soon out of under 19, Stanford came along, and that was the first real taste, I think, for most cricketers in the region of that sort of professional setting, where you're required to practice and plan and so on, and that was a huge eye opener, and from there on, you started to see that there was a lot of potential in terms of a career in the sport. Fortunately for me, cricket also opened doors for my academics. When I applied to the University of the West Indies as a cricketer, I was given a scholarship. And that program probably started the year before I went in. Romel Currency, who is currently the St. Vincent and Grenadines Cricket Association president, he was a long-standing Windward Islands player. I think probably a little bit unfortunate not to have played international cricket, at least one day international cricket for West Indies. But himself and Liam Sebastian, who is another long-standing first-class player, would have gone into that program at the university before I did. And I think that for me is where my cricket changed, my whole outlook on the game changed, where I was introduced to that more tactical and scientific, aspect of the game. Under Floyd Reefer, who I would usually give quite a lot of praise for the way that he went about handling that team and teaching the players about planning and so on and balance. And I think that is where a lot of what what eventually brought me to becoming a selector. I think a lot of that is where a lot of that started. So at Cave Hill, I had already played some first class cricket, not extensively. Don't bring up the stats, please. They're not very, very good to look at. But T20 is what came naturally to me. I like the idea of to me it was always a competition between batsman and bowler, trying to outfox each other. The bowler using his field to his advantage, and having to find a way to manipulate that and get whatever score you're required to get. So a lot of I learned formally, I would say, my formative at Cave Hill.
Just gonna jump in there, Miles, about Cave Hill. It's really interesting that you talk about Cave Hill because, of course, that kind of campus program and the combined colleges and campuses, etc. That's not as established anymore. In fact, Cave Hill being closed down now? I think it has been, is it not? Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think we have missed? Okay, let me rephrase this. Cricket West Indies have decided to go down the route of having everything stationed in Antigua, at Coolidge, etc. And I'm in favour of that. But Cave Hill, for me, set a template that we possibly could have used around the Caribbean, because this is well before Coolidge and what's going on in Antigua. Do you think we should have tried to? Because you were there around what, 2010 to 11 when you're playing for CCC. Do you think we should have tried to emulate that around the Caribbean, or was the funding never really in place to try and do it anywhere other than Cave Hill?
Well, two things were happening at Cave Hill. There was the cricket program, the university cricket program, and around the same time, for a period, there was the Cricket West Indies high performance program.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So I'm not sure which one in particular you're referring to. I was in the Cave Hill program, the University of the West Indies program.
Sorry, I was referring to high performance, but talk us through both either way.
Right. Well, obviously, I don't think anyone would really have anything bad to say about the high performance program, and we know currently it's obvious that it is something that we are missing. I mean, when you look at the West Indies team currently, the players who have been successful most recently, most of them would have come through that program, and it speaks to the value of some sort of structured program, that allows guys to go day in, day out and keep working on the game and honing their talents. So definitely that is a major miss. Obviously, we know that Cricket West Indies is your funding for the most part, and they will be trying to replicate that, as far as I understand, at Coolidge. We all look forward to that. The CCC program was also very important because it catered to a special group of players who were both good at cricket and academically inclined. And usually it's usually hard to be forced to make a choice. I keep remembering when I was at under 15, the West Indies under 15 captain, when he went on to under 19, a very talented batsman who basically went on to study medicine, and he basically had to choose, and he chose to be a doctor, and I think we would have lost a pretty good talent there, and I think it's a travesty if you have to lose quality players who are also academically inclined, because there is huge space for them in the game as well as after they finish, that they can find careers in the game and put their brains to work for Cricket West Indies.
Most definitely. Sorry, Santoki, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I was going to say, 2010, 2011, the Caribbean T20 tournament, you obviously performed well for the CCC. Actually, Mash, interestingly, Nkrumah Bonner was in that team as well. Shows you how long he's been about in regional cricket. And I think they got a win over Jamaica as well at one point, Mash.
No, I don't remember that one.
Yeah, I remember it quite well. We actually drew the very first game of the Caribbean T20. We drew against Barbados. I don't know if you remember that. Romel Currency, who I mentioned earlier, infamously caught Dwayne Smith on the boundary and stepped on the rope.
Yeah.
And that, so the match was tied, and then it went to a super over. And then the super over was tied with that 6 when he mashed the rope. And then the rule at the time was that the team that hit the most 6s won the game. So in stepping on the rope and tying the game, that 6 became the 6 that got Barbados over the edge. All right. So it was some very interesting times, and the cricket that we played at CCC, it was a lot of players who were looked at in some regard as second string guys who probably would not have made the national teams, which was not true in our but in any case, we were able to compete, and as you mentioned, beat Jamaica, and almost had Barbados one year. And since then, CCC has gone on, to win championships. So it just shows that once you have structure and you have guys that are determined to put in the work, you can get results even if you don't have what some might deem to be the wall of talent.
Mm.
And then on the back of that, obviously you got a call up to the West Indies side against England, two T20s you played in the second one. What was that experience like of being called up, getting your debut cap, and being around the international side?
Well, it was a dream come true. All circumstances taken in. I think there was a case where quite a few the regular members of the team were missing, your Gales and Pollards and so on. I think the only 2 senior players that were there would have been Sammy, the captain, and Marlon Samuels. So I remember there were at least 3 debutants on tour. It would have been myself, Nkrumah Bonner, and Gary Mathurin, right? And it was a 2-match series, which we tied 1-1. So, and that game that we won is the game that I played. I played one of the 2. So I do have that record of not having ever lost a game playing for West Indies.
You said 100% record out here,
100% record.
Were you
don't ask my contribution though.
Were you disappointed? Obviously, I know you said you were called up with a lot of senior players missing and stuff. Were you disappointed to not get more opportunities to play for West Indies at T20 level?
Yes, actually, it's one of the things that pushed me into a little bit more into administration and well, further down the road selection. Because at the time I was an opening batsman. We had about 3 of us on the tour that were designated. Well, 4 of us, because Dwayne Smith was opening the batting at that time as well. And I didn't. Even when I played, I had to bat at 3 because Johnson Charles would have started very. He had a strong start to his career on that series and went on to play for some time for West Indies as well. And Dwayne Smith being the senior player. So I didn't get to bat in the opening position. And some people will usually say, if you could open, you could bat at 3. But I tend to have a different opinion that it's a whole different scenario. When you're opening, your job is to be the aggressor. When you come in 1 wicket down inside the power play, you already have to take a more measured approach because you don't want to go from 1 wicket down to 2 wickets down. So it was a little bit different, and I think that it would have been good to get the opportunity to open. And yes, I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to play more. But that would have required me going back to a Caribbean T20 tournament and dominating again, which I don't think I had probably as good a season the following season. And of course, that in T20 cricket we have always had, especially at that time, we have always had a lot of depth in top order batting. So yeah, disappointed, but not. I didn't feel hard done. I just understood that is how it worked at the time.
I mean, ultimately, not everybody can say they've played for the West Indies, so you've achieved a dream in and of itself. But let's go to what most people thought we were going to talk about from the top, and you've kind of already hinted at it that you went to uni, you got a great education in terms of cricket education. You just said about maybe 5 minutes back about how that's when you started to feel that you might want to go down the administration route and so on and so forth. And I'm going to be honest with you, Miles, and maybe I'm wrong. I think to the average West Indian fan, when you became a selector, they would have said to themselves, that's come out of the blue. I'm going to be totally honest with you that they wouldn't have been able to. Obviously, Roger Harper's Roger Harper, but they wouldn't have been with all. And I say this respectfully, and I explain to you why. They'd be like, "Wait, what? Who?" Now, there's two reasons for that. There'll be two big reasons for that. One, not all West Indian fans, and then I'd actually say media as well, would have followed the fact that there were big reviews going on across the whole of Cricket West Indies at the time in terms of governance and finance and selection. I don't know how many people are actually paying attention to that. And you'll probably can see where I'm going with this. But also, two, they wouldn't have known that you would have had, maybe in St. Vincent they would have done, but they wouldn't necessarily have known that you'd had this cricket education and that you'd been behind the scenes looking at cricket administration and so on and so forth. So what I want you to do for us is kind of chart, yes, you were playing cricket, okay, fine, but chart for me the off the field transition, because that must have been going on alongside you playing cricket. Or did it literally go, right, cricket's on the field, I'm not really gonna make it, in the sense? Was it like a footballer who comes to the end of their career and then transitions out? Or were you already doing a parallel transition at the same time? Talk us through the process.
Yes, it was a case of transitioning while I was playing. In fact, I remember that there was one Windward Islands tournament where I left the field playing for St. Vincent to a board meeting, and I think it was at that point that I realized that that was probably not the best situation to be in, and I really should choose, because I don't think that being in the boardroom where the board will be discussing and deciding on selectors, for example, and then back on the field, the selectors that I would have just had some discussion over would be the ones coming back to pick a Windward Islands team for which I would be contending. So that was part of the reason that my official retirement came early. But prior to that, I would have been a first vice president in the St. Vincent and Grenadines Cricket Association as early as 2014. So I started pretty early in terms of administration. And you mentioned review, all of those reviews that were taking place. So I was actually a member of the selection
Selection
review
task force, yeah.
task force, right? And I mean, the findings from that task force were published. Coming out of that task force, we had our very first selection policy, which I don't know if many people are aware of. So all the years that we have been playing cricket as a region, we have not had a documented selection policy. So that is how I got my introduction to that sphere of West Indies cricket, and the position for selector was advertised at the time, and I applied. I don't know how many people know that there was a recruitment process.
Yep.
At that time, I'm part of that recruitment process. There was an exercise, so you were basically given some criteria in which to select a team, and then you had to list the explanation for each player in the team and name your captain and vice captain and give a rationale for those players, which is an exercise I enjoyed immensely. And then you following on from that, you would go on to the actual interview where you would speak on selection philosophy and so on. So that is how I came to be a selector.
I've got loads of questions off that, but Santoki, before I ask Miles the questions, do you reckon if we submit one of our cuss outs, we might get to become selector? We might have a chance of.
I don't know if they would accept you suggesting that Shivnaman Chanderpaul should come back to the West Indies side, age 47.
There's actually a very important question I've got about that, Miles. And like I say, you have to realize, Miles, that when you're explaining this, there will be a lot of people who watch this or listen to this who will hear all those words you said, but they wouldn't have paid attention. So you saying to me, I'm not sure if you knew there was a selection process or that it was a first documented selection policy. Yes, because I was paying attention to what was going on. But I'm guaranteeing you that a lot of people just would have thought this came out of the blue. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is this. Because you took part in the selection task force review, I think it's important that you kind of articulate what type of things came out of that selection task force review, because you know as well as myself and Santoki, when West Indian fans see selection, first and foremost, it's largely an insular process as to where's our guy, where's our woman, if it's the women's team, whatever it might be. How did that man get in the team? Where's this guy? And that's about the extent to which the process goes. But what kind of weaknesses, I guess is a word I'm looking for, did you pick up when the task force review were looking at selection throughout the Caribbean? Where were we in terms of being behind other international teams? Where were our flaws? What did we have to improve on?
Well, the first issue would certainly have been no clear documented process and documented criteria, which was basically the bulk of the work of the task force to get that document together. Another was the introduction of basically a selection analyst, which is somebody who is dedicated to running down and retrieving stats and compiling stats, in various ways, so that the selectors have as much information as possible to work with. So those, I think, were two of the major things that would have come out of the review. The selection policy, which included processes in terms of communication of teams and who is responsible for what and that type of thing. The structure around it all, as well as the criteria. And the structure of the panel also was also changed. If you recall, there were quite a few more selectors previously. So I think there were 4 selectors and then the coach, and that was just 2 selectors and the coach, and then there was the same panel. The same panel was being used for both male and female cricket. So then there was the introduction of the female selection panel, and then there was the idea of linking the youth panel in terms of male cricket to the senior panel, right? And that was done by having the selector on the senior panel, so basically as an ex officio member of the youth panel, so that you always have a selector at the senior level who is, in touch with the youth level, so that you can always look for those players who look for opportunity to fast track players with that selector returning information to the senior panel.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So what's also interesting is Ian Bishop on commentary during West Indies' recent series against Ireland. He was actually talking about being a selector, and he was essentially saying if it was just down to looking at who's got the best stats in the region, anyone could be a selector. So in your own words, what are sort of the main categories you look for as a selector in terms of criteria for picking a general side, not a specific side? What are you looking for in players?
My philosophy on selection is a role-based selection process, right? I think that the bulk of the selection process is a data-intensive exercise in balance, right? Each player in your team has to serve a particular role. And for each role, the player has to have certain attributes, certain skill sets. Right? So for each position in a team, you're looking for a player with certain attributes and certain skill sets. And you can get that information, most of that information, I believe, from statistics, right? And what I've found is that whenever I see statistics, someone is always quick to say that you can't always just look at the numbers on the paper, right? Which I agree with, but you need a baseline. You need something that is completely objective, as your baseline, and then from there you can start to look at other other parts, other facets of the game, right? But definitely you need a baseline. You need to be grounded in statistics, right? And the other issue that I have when I mention the word statistics is that a lot of people think averages and aggregates, and just to me, those are the basic statistics, right? And then, as I mentioned, role-based selection, we are talking about statistics in the context of the role that we are selecting you to play in, right? So, for example, if we are looking for a death bowler, we are not looking at your entire 4-over spell necessarily over the period of 2 or 3 tournaments or 2 or 3 series. What we want to zone into is those overs that you have bowled between over number 16 and 20, right? What is your economy rate in those overs? What is how many wickets do you pick up in those overs, right? And then the other things that the stats won't be able to tell you, what variations do you have? What is your skill set? Is it that you are Yorker? You're going to give me 4 or 5 Yorkers in an over, or is it a mixed bag approach like a Dwayne Bravo, who is going to give you some straight Yorkers, wide Yorkers, slower balls, slower bouncers, and so on. So, but regardless to the way you go about it, regardless to your skill set, you first, in my opinion, you first have to pass the test of the statistics. Because if we are looking for somebody who is going to come in between 7 and 9, for example, in the debt, in terms of economy, which is the most important statistic in the debt, in my opinion, is your economy rate. Because I don't think anyone cares too much if you pick up 5 wickets in the back end, but you go at 13, 15 runs over. I think the batting team would be more satisfied with your performance than your own team. So your performance has to be in the context of the role that you are being selected, you're being looked at for selection, right? And first of all, you have to pass that test, being able to meet the numbers that that you should be able to get in order to make an international team. And then we look at the skill set. So for example, you have if you have two bowlers who meet the mark in terms of the statistics, then you may be looking at separating them based on their skill set, because this particular skill set might be more useful in these conditions, etc., etc. Right. So that is how that is how I look at it in terms of a role-based model of selecting and using statistics in context to determine which player basically has the edge.
There's so many questions and angles to go from that. I've identified 3 main things. Do you feel, because I'm with you on that, but do you feel, and granted we haven't had much cricket in the Caribbean and actually, do you know what, Santoki, Miles and Roger, and obviously Phil would have been the 3rd selector. How do you select when we had no cricket for basically the duration of your whole period as a selector? And I'm smiling, but that's actually ridiculous. If you think about it, I think that new selection panel got the job in October 2019. I think we went to Afghanistan. We went to India to play Afghanistan. I'm talking about the men's team here. Went to India to play Afghanistan. I think we played India, then Sri Lanka, and then COVID came. And basically, since February 2020 to the end of 2021 after the World Cup, we had 1 domestic tournament, 1, and that was Super 50. No first-class cricket. We still, now as we're recording this, yes, we know first-class cricket is coming back, but basically no first-class cricket. How do you select with no cricket? And do you know why I'm asking you as well, Miles? Because I think a lot of, again, I'll go back to fans and media, did not appreciate how difficult it was. Don't get me wrong, we recorded cuss-out videos, but I don't think a lot of fans and media truly appreciate how hard it was for the players to find form regularly, consistently, I should say, coaches to coach. And then I'm going to put it to the selectors, because this is about selection, selectors to select with nothing to really go on. Do you want to come in on that, or is that too much of a hot potato to touch that one?
I think if you look at it as you did, and then to add to that, even from a player's perspective, even when you're with no cricket being played, when you're home, in many cases with lockdowns and so on, it was near impossible for training to take place. And for the selectors, we had best v best series. I think that was the best that we could have hoped for in the conditions. But then those were a couple games, and then again you are talking about players who would have been coming into those games with very little work, coming from lockdown situations where they were hardly able to practice. So it was really about trying to give guys opportunities and you know, give them an opportunity to get a little bit of a run as long as it was possible. But it was difficult. I often laugh sometimes when, you know, you have a lot of players who are doing well and scoring runs and so on, and people say, oh, you know, these players gonna give you guys headaches, right? I find it's very easy to select when you have a lot of cricket and a lot of runs and a lot of wickets being taken, because you have stats to work with, one, and then when you end up with quite a lot of players competing for a spot, then you almost can't fail, because you have any of the choices, you know, would be guys who would have put in performances, you know, and then you have the ability now to look beyond the statistics, right? Because you have already conceded that all of these players have done themselves justice, and you know, they appear to be good enough based on performance alone. You know, they are contending for a spot. So now we are looking for what do they bring to the table in terms of going into the conditions that we are going to, or the opposition that we are playing against. And it allows us now to you know, sort of fine tune, you know, the balance of the team and all of the different skill sets that we could have, and how we could use them to our advantage. So that part of it, to me, is always easier. But what is very difficult, as you said, is when there isn't a lot to go on, right? Not a lot of performances, not a lot of cricket in general, to really try to discern, you know, which player, you know, should get the nod. So it wasn't easy, as you know, as you would have realized. But I still think that, you know, we tried our best.
Another big topic is obviously in the West Indies, when we lose one game, it's the end of the world for a lot of media and a lot of fans, and the cuss out begins. It can go on 24/7, on and on. As a selector, did you ever feel increased pressure because of this? Did you pay a lot of mind to it, or was it something you were able to kind of ignore and just focus on the job?
Yes. What I realized a lot of the time, as Michelle would have said before, a lot of the persons who are speaking, whether it's on social media or whichever media, a lot of them do not have all of the information, right? So they're not aware of everything. So they're speaking from a position where they basically, they're not well informed. So I felt it was wrong to hold it against a person, especially, you know, knowing that I am privy to some information that they are not privy to. And that information would have sent me in the direction that I went, or sent the panel in the direction that it went. And someone outside criticizing who does not have that information, I really cannot, you know, hold it against them for having that position, not knowing what I know. And so that was basically what made it easier for me not to really pay too much attention to, you know, to some of the things that would have been said in the media and on social media.
You're a better man than me, because I would have been cutting everybody. But, Miles, there was another thing I wanted to ask about. I think you loosely touched on it at the start. The role of scouts or data. Yeah, let's call them scouts, because I think, unless I'm mistaken, I think one of the things that was implemented out of the task force review was about, I think it was 2, but I could be wrong. But it was about scouts around the Caribbean. Now, is that an area we need to enhance more so? There's so many countries, there's so many islands. Like, how does a West? Obviously, we've got the domestic tournaments, but I don't know if you see where I'm coming from with this. are the domestic tournaments the be all and end all? Or is that really all we can go on, so to speak? Like, how do you, is there enough television footage, for example? I'm saying a lot of things here, but do we have a good enough scouting network in the Caribbean so that we're not just relying on raw stats? Or is it still a word of mouth kind of thing? Like, so if you're in St. Vincent and obviously Windward Isles are playing or whatever it might be, is it still somebody saying, I think you should take a gamble on this player, even if there's no real stats to support it? So look at someone like let's use Jayden Seales. Okay. So Jayden Seales tore it up in the under-19 World Cup, and within, how long did it take him? Probably a year. Was it a year? Maybe 7 months. Within a year, 7 months to a year, he was debuting for the international side. And by the way, let me say kudos to you and Roger for that, because a lot of people talk about who should or shouldn't have been, but a lot of people don't talk about who has actually debuted in the side and established themselves and done well. So how do you go for someone like a Jayden Seales, where there's no real data per se to go on, but the talent is obvious? That's a lot that I said there, but hopefully you can unpick something from it.
Right. Well, I would still try to keep it as general as possible. But basically, I think to answer it a different way, what is the likelihood that there would be a very good player that nobody has heard of? You know, that word hasn't come
I
to
hope
the
there is,
selection panel.
Yeah,
I think the likelihood is slim to none, right? Slim to none. I think that generally we have a fairly good system in terms of getting the players who are very talented in at some level or another, right? Whether it be under 19s or especially now with the franchise system, right? So in that sense, I don't think that we are losing players, you know, good players who basically fall by the wayside. But I would say that from the review, coming out of the review, because there was a change in the makeup of the structure of the panel, and the amount of selectors were reduced. Considering that the coach is probably on tour more often than not, especially at the time of domestic tournaments, then that would have left myself and Roger. And take, for example, a first-class season with 6 teams playing, that's 3 games and only 2 of us. So we always felt it was important for somebody to have eyes on the cricket, because like you would appreciate, you know, you can see there are cases where you can see clear talent, right? Even if the wickets or the volume of runs doesn't really indicate that, and it's not a case where that person might just be pulled into a West Indies team, but it may just be a case where, you know, we get a tap on the shoulder, you know, and we're told to keep an eye out for this person based on this inning, and you know, the way they went about the inning and so on. You know, it shows some level of, whether it shows some level of maturity or it shows some level of skill, you know, that our skill set that we are missing, and you know, we probably would have mentioned that we're looking for. So in that regard, I think scouts are very important. We would have used some previously, and I'm sure that practice will continue. I think it's a very effective way of you know, finding some of the players whose performances you know, may not quite do justice to their talent.
Okay, before Mash comes in with the final question, I guess as a Guyanese, it's only right I mentioned Roger Harper, obviously an icon in the game. What was it like working alongside him? What did you kind of learn from him, and what was it like with him as a selector?
I mean, Roger is. I mean, I learned quite a lot from him. He knows the game inside out. He listens. He explains. I mean, I learned so much. You know, just having discussions with him about cricket. We generally share the same philosophy on selection. And you know, he is a person of impeccable character. I think probably those were the comments that might have. Those are the comments that were the hardest to ignore for me. You know, those comments about him, and you know, being one way or the other unjust to players, which was totally, you know, just was not fair. It wasn't fair to him at all. So those probably were the hardest comments to really dismiss. But he, as usual, you know, he's a very cool fella. He was able to look at it and you know, basically be unmoved. You know, but I did learn quite a lot from working with him. I'm sure he still has quite a lot to give to West Indies cricket. I know that if ever an opportunity comes, you know, where he is called upon, I'm sure that he wouldn't hesitate to step forward and do what he has to do for West Indies cricket. So it was a privilege, I would say, working with Roger.
Love that. And we had and anytime we get a guest on, we always throw it out to some of the listeners of the podcast and say, are there any pertinent questions you want us to answer? Sorry, we've actually asked pretty much all of them, but there was one, and this is from a resident of the St. Vincent and Grenadines, who said he wanted us to ask. Now, so in fact, I was having a back and forth with him the other day because this is more now general to domestic first-class cricket. So taking our eye off like the senior men's or women's teams or anything like that. The Windward Owls haven't been that good in first-class cricket for a while. And so this gentleman, I think it's Colin Velox, had said, what needs to happen for the Windward Islands to be more competitive? Let's talk just first class. I'm not talking like I'm not talking Super 50, specifically first class cricket. What would you say to him you'd like to see change in order to make the Windwards team far more competitive?
Okay. Currently, I think with the first class structure, I think initially, prior to the franchise system, the Windwards basically suffer the same way that West Indies suffer, because we have four islands. Anything that has to be done would require serious logistics, flights, hotels, and you know, it makes it difficult for us to have tournaments. They're usually expensive. So we used to have 3-day domestic tournaments, and of late, finances, basically, we have only been able to have 2-day tournaments, which I don't think is sufficient if you want to really be able to compete, you know, in 4-day cricket. I don't think enough, and it's basically just 3 2-day games, and then a team is selected. Prior to the franchise system, the team would probably meet for a week or a few 10 days before the first class game, which is hardly enough time to really gel and get your balance and so on, right? So that was one of the difficulties. But with the franchise system now, where you know the players are domiciled and they basically engage professionally, I don't think that we have that excuse, and for the last few years, I think that we would have probably done a little bit of an injustice to the system that we have. Granted, I think that the franchise system needs a bit of a shake-up, which I think there is currently a review of the franchise that is currently underway. So I'm very happy, and I'm really looking forward to the outcome from that. But really, what has to happen in the Windwards is that we have to have a structured program with plans, individual plans for player development. That has to be one of the things that gets priority, player development. I think that has to be the case across the entire franchise system, because I don't think there is any point for any team to be winning. You're winning the cup, but the what is produced for a West Indies team, doesn't help West Indies to move up the
100%.
rankings, right? So it definitely has to be a case of an emphasis being placed on player development. Definitely, as a selector, I can say without any doubt at all that the talent is there in abundance. I'm sure that you get glimpses of it even when we're not doing well. You still get glimpses of the abundance of talent that we have. So we know it's just an issue of harnessing that talent and really churning out performances consistently. So that is where the emphasis, I think, has to be for the Windwards and for all of the franchises, all franchises across the region.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say across all the franchises, because I'm with you on that. And like you, I'm intrigued to see this review you're talking about with the franchise system. I'm intrigued to see where that goes, because I think Pollard alluded to it recently, where he said that whatever we're doing, it needs to be something that's happening across the whole region. So yeah, most definitely. Santoki, should we do the final question?
Yeah, it's time. It's time for the big question, Mash.
We haven't done this in a while, because of all the different types of episodes we've been doing. But Miles, this is the big question that we ask everybody who comes on the podcast. What is your favorite ground in the Caribbean? And you are not allowed to state anything related to your home nation. Just before you answer, bear in mind that Santoki is of Guyanese extract and I am of Jamaican extract. And we are intrigued to know what your answer is. If there was only one ground you could watch the West Indies at, what would you choose?
Oh, I thought you were asking which ground I prefer to play at.
Oh, no, you can answer that as well. In fact, no, sorry, yeah. Sorry, actually, because we were thinking of the selectors. What ground would you play at? Sorry, let's put it there.
I think the answer would be the same in both cases. Kensington Oval, I think, I know they refer to it as the Mecca in Barbados, a proud people. But I do have to give them that, when you step into the facility, you feel like you're part of West Indies cricket. Now and the rich history that they have. It's a lovely facility. I used to enjoy the wicket there, and I think that it really deserves the title of the Mecca. I don't know how Santoki would feel about that, but what would have come in a close second would be Border, Santoki. I had similar memories of Border when you walk into that ground as well. You really feel the rich history, and that is a lovely place for a batsman as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna ignore Kensington Oval, so we'll take Border as his answer.
not even an attempt to please me with any mention of Sabina, but it's okay. We understand.
I do not have good memories at Sabina.
But Miles, I just want to say Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And kind of like we've said, well, throughout the whole episode, this has been important. It's actually been really important. I'm not saying our listenership is completely massive or anything like that, but I think this will be a cherished episode for some, if not many, simply to just understand the art of selection, and particularly in the Caribbean. We understand the art of cussing, but we don't necessarily understand the art of selection and what goes into that, and how decisions are made, and so on and so forth. So if this just plays a little role in helping people kind of break down some myths they might have about selection, I mean, Desmond Haynes and Ronnie Sarwan will be the beneficiaries of it, but you laid the platform. You laid you laid the platform for it in terms of people having some understanding. And just, I guess, just lastly, Miles. So what next? What next for Miles Bascombe? What any decisions on what you want to do next in the game of cricket, or what you're going to just take some time out and gather thoughts?
Well, I'm still very much involved in administration. I'm still very close to the Windward Islands board. I plan to try to start that process, of revamping the Windward Islands franchise. To start, I think that it's important that we have an idea of what that structure needs to look like. I think we have enough expertise around. Fortunately, with my stint as selector, I would have been in contact regularly with the director of cricket, Jimmy Adams. I would have met people like Chris Brabazon and high performance director Graham West. So I would have used my time wisely to pick some of the brains of those guys, who have. Chris is coming from Australia, who has a very they have a very strong cricket system. Graham out of England, who was also part of the High Performance Center. So I'm going to try my best to take some of what I would have learned from these guys and see how we can try to implement it in the Windward Islands, the Windward Volcanoes franchise, to see if, we can start to do, what needs to be done in terms of, getting our players, giving them the best chance, at being successful when they do get to the international level.
Most definitely. Santoki, I'll let you finish us off with the final words.
Yeah. So that's been episode 56, everyone. Miles, thank you very much for coming on, giving up your time and giving us, more importantly, an insight into the art of selection, as Machel said. Obviously, it's an easy position for fans to cuss out, but you've given us sort of education as to what entails being a selector. So we just like to thank you for taking time out to come on the show.
Yes, I think that it would all go well for cricket. The more people that are aware of how things are done, it will help us to start asking the right questions. Like, what is the role of, what is the role that you expect from this player, right? And not so much why wasn't this player selected? Because usually when I'm asked that question, or when I used to be asked that question, why wasn't this player selected? I would usually answer by asking, okay, so if not him, then who, right? And that usually takes the respondent a while to give me an answer. Or if they ask me why this player was not selected, then I would ask them in place of who, and try to get them to think about it rationally. Is it a like for like replacement? Are they going to fill the same role in the team? Is this person better at the particular role that this person is intended to play? I would give one example. Hopefully CWI doesn't invoke their confidentiality clause. But there was one particular question about Akil Hussein
Mm.
coming in for Fabian Allen and going into an 11, for example, before the other spinner in the squad, right? And it's a case of Fabian Allen having a role as a spinner in the power play, and when he is replaced, he has to be replaced by somebody who can also fill that role, and that is what is meant by when I speak about role-based selection. That was a key role, right? Because we have had issues in the power play, and Akil had experience bowling in the power play, and I dare say that he filled that role quite well in the World Cup. One of the highlights, I would say. So on that, I will sit by my laptop and await a letter from CWI's legal team.
No, I think you're fine with that one. But that's a good one to end on. And you know what, people, I'll just say, like I said, just reiterate for those listening, for all the cussing and all the cuss outs that happened over the last 2 years, I do just think it's worth remembering that there are several players who we now consider established members of the West Indies cricket team across various formats who got introduced within the last 2 years. So if we're not, we can cuss selectors, but we can also praise selectors in the said same way as well. So, as Santoki said, ladies and gentlemen, that has been episode 56 of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Thank you and good night.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rule seems coming to